There's an old adage at war planning colleges that the best battle plan never survives first contact with the enemy. No matter how good it is, it can be perfectly thought through, everything accounted for, every variable taken into account, and sometimes it still backfires. This is what happened with the left and Donald Trump. I pointed out throughout this year that the left, through their friends in the media, promoted Donald Trump throughout the GOP primaries as part of what they do every 4 years, which is shove down the throats of the Republican nominating electorate the candidate that they want the Democrat to face, the weakest possible opponent for the Democrat nominee. It's as simple as that. They do it every 4 years. And conservatives always fall for it because conservatives can never unite behind one champion, one candidate. Even when, and I know, well, we're individualists and they're collectivists. Well, sometimes there are strength in numbers. And if you want to stop the establishment from getting their candidate, which as often or even more often than not lines up with the candidate that the left wants as Republican nominee, then you got to unify. You got to make common cause. You got to get behind the most viable conservative alternative that actually has a chance to win. Now, the irony of this campaign, of course, 2016, was that the candidate that the left wanted was Donald Trump, and there were a lot of ex-conservatives, cuck-servatives, Trumplicans who agreed with them. And so, I mean, it was like the Republican Party was willingly committing suicide, politically speaking. And then the Democrats nominated Hillary Clinton. And thus they left themselves open for some. I mean, I said that going back 2 or 3 years, that Hillary Clinton is an awful candidate, terrible, no political skill set. People don't like her. People don't trust her. The more visible she is, the more unpopular she becomes. By nominating Hillary Clinton, despite knowing all of this, the Democrats left themselves open for what actually did happen 10 days ago. So the first segment here is Alexandra DeSanctis at nationalreview.com on why the left promoted Trump in the GOP primary. And of course, I've already summarized that, but we're going to get into the details here. Alexandra DeSanctis is a William F. Buckley Fellow in Political Journalism at the National Review Institute. The way the Democrats put it is elevate the Republicans' Pied Piper candidates. That was the advice that came from the DNC, Democrat National Committee. Now, in the wake of Hillary Clinton's surprising loss to Donald Trump in this year's presidential election, it's worth considering the undeniable role her campaign played in elevating him as the Republican presidential nominee. The bitter irony is that her team started out determined to face Trump rather than any of the other GOP candidates, which was the best strategy. It wasn't a bad strategy. It's just that they didn't have a candidate that could make even that much work. Drawing on the belief that the politically inexperienced, blustering business mogul would be the easiest to defeat, which he was. Again, it was the correct strategy. It's just that the Democrats nominated a candidate so bad that she couldn't even beat Trump. If Hillary had been facing Marco Rubio, you're probably looking at like 370 to 168 in the Electoral College. I mean, it would have been that bad. Trump only barely managed to defeat her. Just bear that in mind. The emails released over the past few months by WikiLeaks provide a number of examples of Mrs. Clinton's staff agonizing over the more qualified candidates, such as Florida Senator Marco Rubio, and expressing, who was the most electable Republican candidate in the field, I might add, and expressing the desire to face Trump in the general election. Correct strategy. In fact, the Democrat nominee and her team seem to have been afraid of going up against nearly all of the other Republican primary candidates. Makes perfect sense. Take, for example, this section from an email from Brent Budowski, a Marxist blogger and former congressional staffer, to Clinton campaign chairman John Podesta. Quote, "Right now I am petrified that ladies and gentlemen, that Hillary is almost totally dependent on Republicans nominating Trump," which she was. She has huge, listen to this. This is a member of, this is a Democrat liberal blogger in an email to the chairman of the Hillary Clinton campaign. She has huge endemic political weaknesses that she would be wise to rectify. Even a clown like Ted Cruz would be an even money bet to beat her, and this scares the hell out of me. It's old home week for hard starvation on these points. Several emails uncovered by WikiLeaks revealed that when Rubio launched his presidential bid, Mrs. Clinton's staff immediately drew parallels between the Hispanic senator and, ta-da, Barack Obama. Not anything that I wasn't saying several years ago, and it's not because, oh, I'm so brilliant, or I'm clairvoyant, or I can see things nobody else can see. No, it was easy to see. Think about it. Minority, charismatic, freshman senator from a swing state. Okay, Illinois is not a swing state, but you get the idea. It made perfect sense. Same thing with Ted Cruz. Both fresh-faced leaders who cast themselves as the voice of a new generation. I'm not talking about the Pepsi commercial. This comparison caused many staffers to think back to 2008, when Mrs. Clinton lost the Democrat primary to just such a young and vibrant senator, but on her own side of the aisle. Christina Reynolds, who went on to become Deputy Communications Director for the Hillary Clinton campaign, wrote of Rubio to Mrs. Clinton's staff, quote, "He gives a good speech and sounded much more reasonable, populist, and accessible than much of the rest of the GOP field." Close quote. Now, springboarding off these concerns, in April of last year, Mrs. Clinton's staff circulated an email with a strategy guide for discussion within the Democrat National Committee describing Trump, Cruz, and Ben Carson as Pied Piper candidates, whom the Democrats should seek to elevate and legitimize. More from the guide. Quote, "Many of the lesser-known, Trump, Cruz, Carson, can serve as a cudgel." Lesser-known? Trump had universal name recognition. I don't know what they're talking about there. "Can serve as a cudgel to move the more established candidates further to the right." Well, in this scenario, we don't want to marginalize the more extreme candidates, but make them more Pied Piper candidates who actually represent the mainstream of the Republican Party. We need to be elevating the Pied Piper candidates so that they are leaders of the pack and tell the press to take them seriously. Close quote. Well, it seems that this argument resonated with the press. Gee, there's a shock. At least among Marxist media figures. The longing to see Mrs. Clinton face Trump rather than one of the qualified, actual GOP contenders was not confined to the Democrat campaign. Stunning, I know. This just in. Marxist writers hopped on board with the Democrat strategy, legitimizing Trump at that $2 billion of free media at the expense of more traditional candidates such as Rubio and Bush, who especially initially were widely thought to have a better chance at defeating Mrs. Clinton. And if this is about stopping Hillary, then, why not maximize the chances of doing so? At Vox, for example, Matt Iglesias in February explained why I'm more worried about Marco Rubio than Donald Trump, noting, among other ridiculous arguments, that Trump was... ridiculous argument? That Trump was actually, quote, actually running on a much less extreme agenda than his establishment rival Marco Rubio, who's offering a platform of economic ruin, multiple wars, attacks on civil liberties. That's nearly as vicious as anything Trump has proposed, even while wrapping it in an edgy, anxious, overreaction-prone approach to politics that heavily features big, risky bets and huge, unpredictable changes in direction. Close quote. Okay, I guess that was ridiculous. That same month, Jonathan Chait offered a similar take at New York Magazine. In Why Liberals Should Support a Trump Republican Nomination, he argued that liberals should favor Trump primarily because he would almost certainly lose, and because a Trump nomination might upend his party. Assertions that clearly echo the La Clinton Nostra strategy, and they weren't wrong about that, except about the losing part. He also claimed that a Trumpetency would probably wind up doing less harm to the country than a Marco Rubio or a Cruz presidency. What does that tell you? That tells you, hey, Trump is one of us. And if Trump takes over the Republican Party and makes the Republican Party a wholly owned subsidiary of the Democrat Party, that's good for us. We don't want a conservative in there. We want a liberal like Trump. And that's exactly what they're getting. It's just right now, their tribalism is asserting itself. Chait continued, it might even possibly do some good if Trump won. See, I told you so, Trumpers. Just 1 month later, Chait made a hasty 180 turn in his follow-up piece, Donald Trump poses an unprecedented threat to American democracy. Which he does, but that's another video. Last November, Slate's Jamal Bowie insisted that Donald Trump is actually a moderate Republican. A Rockefeller Republican, in other words. Establishment, anyone? The median Republican who, in stark opposition to the other candidates, in stark opposition to the GOP candidates, stands at the center of the party and was notable for his ability to be reasonable and to attract unique pockets of voters within the Republican base. And without. Then, just yesterday, Bowie determined that Trump is actually not a moderate Republican, but rather a racist demagogue and white nationalist whose supporters deserve no empathy. The thing is, he's right about both. He's right about both, folks. These stunning feats of rhetorical backtracking are somewhat dizzying, and again, it's the tribalism kicking in. And it seems that they began among Marxist writers and pundits as well as within Mrs. Clinton's campaign as more people began to realize that Trump could win the nomination. But no one seemed to realize, especially in the closing months of the general election campaign, that Trump had a decent chance to win the presidency too, because Mrs. Clinton was such an awful candidate. If Mrs. Clinton and her staff had been able to see the future, no doubt they would have shifted their strategy quite. No, I don't think they would have. I don't forget Hillary and her staff. If the Democrat Party as a whole had been able to see the future, they would not have nominated her in the first place. Even Bernie Sanders would have defeated Donald Trump. And of course, if it wasn't, Julian Castro's not ready yet. He will be in 2020. Absolutely will be in 2020. But if, for this time, if the Democrats had followed my advice and nominated Elizabeth Warren, drafted Elizabeth Warren if that's what it took, let's just say that a lot of these progressives who are losing their minds these days would have been in a lot better mood. The same dynamic continues in Jonah Goldberg's syndicated column today. Now, again, the left was not wrong to shove Trump down our throats as the Republican nominee. That was the correct strategy. Their mistake was in nominating Hillary Clinton. Just as Trump was the only candidate that Hillary Clinton could beat, so Hillary was the only candidate that Trump could beat. And Trump ended up coming out on top. So it's not that the left set themselves up. They did, but not by getting Trump nominated, but by nominating Mrs. Clinton themselves. So the war on normalization has begun, as the same progressives who praised Trump last winter are now whining. The media is starting to normalize Donald Trump, and it should make you very scared, proclaims a headline in Salon. HBO's haughty in-house mocker, John Oliver, says, optimism is nice if you can swing it, but you've got to be careful because it can feed into the normalization of Donald Trump, and he's not normal. Can't argue with that. But he is going to be president. God help us all. There is scads more of this stuff, but I have 2 points to make, so let's keep moving. The first point is not particularly new, but it's important to the handful of us with a sacred right to say, we told you so! Or, put another way, where the hell were you people before? Throughout the primaries, Trump's conservative opponents complained bitterly that the media was normalizing Trump. Of course, they were doing it because they thought that was, and they were correct about this, that was the only way that Mrs. Clinton could win in November. Of course, if they had nominated anybody else but Mrs. Clinton, that would have turned out to be the case. And no one listened for 3 reasons. Trump was good for ratings, the spectacle aspect, and got billions worth of free media as a result. CBS honcho Les Moonves said that Trump's success may not be good for America, but it's damn good for CBS. Second, the media and numerous liberal pundits loved Trump's impact on the GOP. Yeah, I would think so. For the same reason bored teenagers like to throw lit matches into dumpsters. Garbage fires are fun to watch. The third reason is closely related to the second. The media thought Trump was more likely to lose to Hillary Clinton, which he was. It's just that Hillary Clinton was even more likely, as it turned out, to lose to Trump. And so did the Clinton campaign itself, as we learned from WikiLeaks. Now, in February, Jonathan Chait, a writer for New York Magazine and the author of a forthcoming book explaining how super terrific Barack Obama's presidency was, wrote a piece titled, Why Liberals Should Support a Trump Republican Nomination. He listed 3 reasons. Trump would lose, Trump would wreak havoc on the GOP, and Trump would be better than the other Republican candidates from a left-wing nut perspective. Well, he was 2 out of 3, I guess. If he does win, Chait wrote, a Trumpenstein would probably wind up doing less harm to the country than a Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz presidency. It might even possibly do some good. In other words, Chait was saying, Trump is a liberal! And he was right. But then, tribalism kicks in more recently. The day after the election, last Wednesday, Chait declared on Twitter, this is the worst thing that has happened in my life. Yeah, well, even the best battle plans sometimes they don't survive first contact with the enemy, especially when your principal weapon, there's nothing really secret about it, but your principal weapon turns out to be a dud. Okay, then. Shortly after the election, Slate's Jamel Bowie wrote a piece titled, There's No Such Thing as a Good Trump Voter. You can make the case for that assertion. Likening some 60 million Americans to a racist lynch mob. Well, not all 60 million, but not insignificant portion. That's accurate description. Last year, Bowie penned an article with the headline, Donald Trump is actually a moderate Republican, which he's not a Republican, but the rest of it fits the description. See, both of these assertions are true. Trump is a racist white nationalist. He also is a liberal Democrat. The two go together, actually. Of course, Chait and Bowie are not alone. Marxist figures such as Paul Krugman, Matt Iglesias, Robert Bourassa, Amanda Marcotte, and Bill Maher all said during the primaries that Trump was less scary than Rubio or Cruz because Trump's a liberal. Rubio and Cruz are conservatives. Isn't it awfully late to be decrying the normalization of Trump when you were an early adopter of normalization because you thought the horrible Democrat nominee would have an easier time beating him? Well, yeah, it is, but remember, tribalism, never underestimate the power of partisan tribalism. That brings me to my second point. The normalization of the Clintons. Liberals may have thought that the Trump campaign's exploitation of the women Bill Clinton sexually mistreated was tawdry and beyond the pale. Fair enough. But you know why such tactics worked? Because Bill Clinton was tawdry and beyond the pale. But liberals not only normalized him, they lionized him and demonized his critics. You may object to Trump's there's nothing alleged about it. You may object to Trump's shady business practices, and we all should. But I objected to the Clinton schemes as well. When the Clinton Foundation finally started to become an issue in the campaign, James Carville insisted that somebody's going to hell for daring to question the Olympian goodness of Clinton Inc., La Clinton Nostra. That encapsulates how the Clintons responded to all of their critics. Great moral superiority combined with base intimidation. Liberals knew when Bill Clinton ran for president in 1992 that he was a tawdry, corner-cutting cad, and that Hillary Clinton was a conspiratorial schemer. But he was on their side, so it was okay. He won. He was a winner. Starting to sound familiar, Trumpers? Besides, once elected, he deserved the benefit of the doubt, even though he won a smaller share of the popular vote than did Trump, because you have only one president at a time, and in a democracy, well, we're not supposed to be a democracy, we're supposed to be a republic, but you get the idea in more ways than one, I trust. Elections are inherently normalizing is the point. And no, Clinton didn't deserve the benefit of the doubt. He got it anyway. Maybe Trump deserves similar treatment? No, he doesn't, and he's not going to get it. That's the difference in having the media as your ally versus having the media as your enemy. And because Trump has an R after his name, they're going to be his enemy, and he will get none of the benefit of the doubt. He will get no wagon circling. He will get no help in covering up all his scandals and all his cut cronyism and all the rest of it. For somebody as thin-skinned as Donald Trump, this is going to be... This is why there are a lot of us who think that Trump will quit. He won't serve out his term. Because when you are the president of the United States, especially if you've got an R after your name, the buck stops on your desk. And he won't be able to handle that. You have to have a certain degree of thick skin. Donald Trump is the most thin-skinned human being on the face of the planet. We needed calm. We needed boredom from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue over the next 4 years. We got just the opposite. So you're Trumpers, I tell you, if this is what turns you on, of constantly being embattled, constantly being besieged, if that's what turns you on, boy, you're gonna exhaust your Kleenex supply, is all I can tell you. Now, I'm not trying to start a pointless debate about who is more abnormal, though I'd argue that Trump would win that contest. But it's worth pointing out that when you spend a long time bending political norms for partisan reasons, those norms eventually break, and this is what you get. Or, to employ another old adage, what goes around comes around. Now, Carrie Lucas today at National Review poses a question that she really to which she really should know the answer, but doesn't, or at least not that it evinces itself in her essay today at the National Review. But I will be happy to fill in that blank. But here is her question. Expressed in an entire essay. Leftist protesters have taken to the streets in opposition to President-elect Trump, but what are they trying to accomplish? There is an answer, and we'll get to this before the end of this video. Anti-Trump protests are ongoing, with hundreds still gathering around the country to denounce the results of the 2016 election. This may just be the beginning. Well, she got that right. The Daily Mail reports that a women's march on Washington is being planned to coincide with the inauguration in January. Within 24 hours of the announcement of the effort, more than 35,000 people had signed on to participate, which, incidentally, is 3.5% of the desired total. Protests and demonstrations have a noble history in the United States and have been used effectively to awaken people to worthy causes and issues. Plus, protests and demonstrations is just what the left does. It's reflexive to them. I mean, they would do it even if they do it even without having anything to protest. It's just they protest and demonstrate. When done right, they can encourage others who share the protesters' concerns but who are reticent to speak up to join them, thereby building momentum for action. The Americans planning to march on Washington to protest the incoming president must be hoping to build on this tradition. Yet strategic thinkers on the left ought to consider what these protests will accomplish and whether they are likely to advance or might actually hinder their larger cause. But it won't hinder the larger cause because Miss Lucas here doesn't seem to understand what that is. Here's a hint. Look back at recent American political history. After all, protests have become increasingly common in recent years. Students on college campi now regularly stage demonstrations. Again, the demonstration reflex of the left. Many of these protests seem to be an end in themselves, with students rallying against innocuous administration policies and for higher wages on campus, but mostly seeming to enjoy the experience and camaraderie of the protest itself. Yes, some protests are seriously undertaken with the intention of bringing about results. Take the 2015 protests, which include a student hunger strike at the University of Missouri against the university's policies related to race and their response to racial incidents on campus, which resulted in both the president and chancellor stepping down. While that protest succeeded in bringing about changes that the protesters were calling for, they failed to build support among the public. In fact, a poll taken in Missouri after the protest found that by a fairly wide margin, the state's public does not view the University of Missouri's recent protests and associated events very favorably. Twice as many Missourians disagreed with student protesters' message as agreed with them. 62% disagreed with student protesters' actions, while just 20% agreed. In other words, these students may have won the battle, but they were hurting their prospects in the larger war. Don't over-apply that conclusion, Kerry. The polls didn't dig into why respondents felt this way, but one can surmise from other commentaries at the time that many Missourians thought that the students were being unreasonable in their demands and taking their privilege to attend the university for granted. The poll also found that 5 times as many people said they viewed the University of Missouri's administration more negatively as a result of the recent events than said they viewed them more positively. Most likely, that's because the administration cowed to student demands. By a 10-point margin, these same respondents were against increasing the cigarette tax to fund student aid. Perhaps many oppose higher taxes on principle, but disgust with the students' behavior certainly didn't help build support for increased student funding. Protests against President-elect Trump are similarly likely to fail in terms of rallying public opinion to their cause. Not necessarily. You're being premature here, Kerry. Coming immediately after an election, these marches and protests appear to be mostly sour grapes and are laced with hypocrisy. After all, the left has been lecturing the country about the need to accept the legitimacy of the electoral process days before voting began, when they believed Mrs. Clinton was a sure thing. Yet now they are the ones destroying property, holding up profane "not my president" signs. By the way, he's not my president either, but he will be the president. That's kind of the difference here. And calling for people to try to change the rules of the election after the fact, which, no, that's not going to happen. Nor should it. This is far more likely to turn centrist voters off than to make them want to join their team. But just hold your horses. Hold your horse, because I'm driving towards something here. Republicans are not known for their ability to use protests effectively. Yeah, I'd say that's right. But anti-Trump forces ought to consider how the GOP regained its strength after devastating losses in 2008. You just wait until 2020. That's all I'm telling you. Most Republicans didn't protest Obama's election in 2008, but instead signaled, no, they didn't. Didn't signal their support for him. They acknowledged, yeah, Obama won the election. That's quite different from saying that they signaled support for him. It was only after Obama pursued specific policies with which they disagreed, such as the mammoth stimulus package, Trump's is even bigger, I hasten to add, and the move toward government-run health care, which Trump also supports, that conservatives began organizing, well, they weren't conservative as it turned out. The origin of the Tea Party, obviously they weren't conservative, they supported Trump. The Tea Party movement failed to stop the stimulus or Obamacare. Yeah, the Tea Party failed to stop it. But it succeeded in galvanizing conservative opposition, encouraging more people to get involved, and ultimately it led to the success at the midterm elections in 2010. Marches on Washington and profane social media campaigns may be cathartic for passionate liberals stinging from a loss, but they won't accomplish what the left needs if the goal is to regain a greater share of the public trust and to build lasting, reasoned opposition to policies that Trump will advance during the next 4 years, which will be liberal policies. which may be his only way out of what's coming. They have every right to march, but they should recognize that they are marching against their own interests. Wrong! Wrong, Carrie. Miss Lucas, wrong. The left is not marching against their own interests. This is a down payment. Now, I want you to go back 16 years. Florida 2000. The point at which the left went certifiably cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. Certifiably and permanently. And you will remember that they, this is when the phrase, the concept of Bush derangement syndrome was coined. This is when it was born. And the left was absolutely batshit insane. And they never stopped bashing Bush. They never stopped going after Bush. They never stopped protesting against him. They never stopped demonizing him. And eventually it was successful. I would make, now, what happened, in essence, what happened in George W. Bush's second term is what would have happened in his first term had it not been for the 9/11 attacks. The one and only reason that George W. Bush was reelected in 2004 was because of 9/11. Without the 9/11 attacks, George W. Bush is a one-termer. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that Hillary Clinton might have run in 2004 instead of 2008. I mean, it's that simple. No 9/11, no second Bush term. And what happened in Bush's second term, there were daily, relentless demonization. Bush lied, people died, blah, 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 would have happened in his first term, and he'd have been a one-termer. It was a constant, daily, day in and day out drumbeat of demonization and protest and rabble-rousing and the whole 9 yards. Protests, demonstrations, and it worked. By sheer repetition, by sheer volume, it worked. If you think that this is just a post-election temper tantrum, you have not been paying attention to the left for the past 16 years. You haven't been. Period. This is just the beginning. These protests, these demonstrations are not going to stop. They will continue. And it may look like sour grapes now. In fact, it is sour grapes now. But Trump is going, by virtue, by the nature of who and what Donald Trump is, he's going to give them all kinds of protest, demonstration, ammunition. And the media will help. And they will turn the American people against Donald Trump. In fact, a majority of Americans are against Donald Trump as it is. This is a president-elect who, once he's sworn in, is not going to get a honeymoon period. The left will see to it, the Democrats will see to it, the media will see to it. And it will work. Because now you all know that I've always believed, I thought at the time, and I think to this day, that George W. Bush's biggest mistake is that he never defended himself. He never defended himself. He never defended his policies. He never engaged. He just, other than the 2004 general campaign, he just let the other side pound the living snot out of him. Never, unopposed. That's the only reason that the 2004 election was as close as it was. It's because Bush never defended himself. Now, you may be thinking, well, Trump's the opposite of that. Trump's a counterpuncher. Yeah, but that's the other extreme. There's a difference between defending yourself substantively, defending your policies substantively, and what Donald Trump does, because Donald Trump doesn't have an ounce of substance in his entire worthless carcass. Donald Trump has no principles. Donald Trump doesn't stand for anything except Donald Trump. He will defend himself, not particularly effectively. He'll do so in a way that buries himself and does a lot of the left's job for them. And Trump supporters are going to go, yeah! And the rest of the country will go, ugh! Trump will enter office, just like Hillary Clinton would have, the most unpopular first-term president of the modern era. And he will go downhill from there. And he will do things, because of who he is, Trump will do things, Trump will say things, his surrogates will say things because they're extensions of him. And he will have scandals, and he will push policies that are hugely unpopular, that will betray conservatives right and left. And that may be the only thing that helps Trump, that mitigates the damage that Trump does to himself, is that he's going to push a liberal agenda and bring the GOP, drag the GOP left along with him. But because he's got that R after his name, it's not going to cut any slack with the left and their friends in the media. So this constant drumbeat of protest and demonstration and agitation, it's not just post-election sour grapes. Have you forgotten, has Kerry Lucas forgotten what happened for 8 years in the last decade? In the previous decade? This will continue unrelentingly, and it will work. And you know who's going to ride that momentum, aside from the momentum that Trump provides, to victory in 2020? Julian Castro, the Democrats' next great brown hope. You heard it here first.